a few years ago, I fell about 45 feet. I broke 25 bones in my body, my neck, my back, 20 of my ribs, my femur. I was transported to the hospital where they tried to stabilize me to be able to life flight me. And I flatlined several times, and all the doctors and the nurses kind of gave up and left the room and said, you know, she's dead. And then there was just one doctor that came back and just decided to try a little longer, and he was able to stabilize me enough to life flight me to a bigger hospital. So I climbed up to go off this rope swing, and it was just, all it was a rope with a board attached, and you just stuck it between your legs and jumped off, and you kind of free-falled for a little while. And the tower that I was on was 45 feet, and when I jumped off this time, then the board broke, and so I just hit the ground. I hit my leg first, which is what snapped my femur, and then I fell forward, which broke all my ribs, and I got the brain injury. They called 911. It took them 40 minutes to get there. I don't remember any of what happened. This is just what people have told me. But I wasn't breathing. Both my lungs were collapsed and punctured. And
well, so we were in Roosevelt, or just outside of Roosevelt. So we were kind of out in the middle of nowhere, which is why it took so long to get an ambulance there. And she fell, and we immediately called 911. But it was just kind of a matter of, like, keeping her alive, I guess, until they got there. And so there was a few family friends that were there talking with the 911 operators, and they didn't end up doing CPR, which actually saved her life. But she just kind of somehow survived for those 40 minutes until an ambulance got there. And then they took her to Roosevelt Hospital, which is just kind of a little small hospital out in the middle of nowhere. And nobody knew her. The reason her heart stopped is because the fluid in the sac had filled up to where her heart couldn't beat anymore. And nobody had done the procedure where they removed that fluid. And so the doctor just finally said, you know, if I don't do it, she's dead. And if I try it and it's wrong, then, you know, we haven't lost anything. And so he just did it and was successful. And I was with my mom and dad and my brother at the hospital in Roosevelt waiting to see her. And they just kept telling us, like, we want to life flight her to a bigger hospital, but she's not stable enough to life flight yet. And they kept waiting, and finally they came out and they said, well, she's still not stable enough, but we can't keep her alive here, so we're going to life flight her anyway. And they just said, if you want a chance to come in and say goodbye, do, because there's a good chance she won't make it with her heart and her lungs in the condition they are. The altitude that the helicopter's going to have to get to go over the mountains could be too much for her, and she you know, we can't guarantee she's going to make it all the way to the other hospital. And so we all went in and said goodbye to her, and they were bagging her by hand to get her, keep her breathing. And then we had to just leave and get in the car and drive 3 hours down to the next hospital, and it was just kind of, if she's alive when we get there, then she has a chance. And so when we got there, she was in surgery and still alive. So
the hospital, when they transferred me to the hospital, I went into the ICU, and it took a while to find everything that was wrong. But when they finally did, it was I had fractured my back and my neck, and I had broken my femur, which they had to do surgery on and they went in and they put my leg in traction, and to kind of straighten it out because it was like up by my head. And so they put it in traction and then went and did surgery on it and inserted a metal rod right through the bone and then pins at my knee and my hip. And then my ribs were, 20 of them were broken, and on the right side they were all shattered. And so they had to go in and plate all my ribs on the right side. And then they were going to fuse my neck and my back. But by the time they had got done with the rib surgery, and this is over a period of, days and stuff, then my neck and back had started to heal enough that it didn't need to be fused. Anyway, so I spent 10 days in the ICU, and then they transferred me to the trauma unit. I was paralyzed on my left side, and I had some brain injury, and so I wasn't myself. I wasn't able to hear very well and smell, and like my moods were like, whew, and I couldn't remember everything, and I kept, I'd go to sleep and wake up, ask what happened, go to sleep, wake up, ask what happened, and so they had to tie me down in the hospital bed because the one side of the left side was paralyzed, and I kept like flailing because I didn't know what to do. But by the time they transferred me to the trauma unit, then I had regained enough feeling in my arm that I could move it. And so I spent about a week on the trauma floor, and then they moved me to the rehab unit. And we started doing rehab. I had to learn how to swallow again and to eat and to walk. And when they first came in to get me to go to my first day of physical therapy, then the therapist came in and he pulled back the covers and he said, "Okay, today we're just going to get you to move your feet." And at this point, I wasn't aware of everything that had happened because I had been drugged and I'd been, I knew I had fallen. I knew there was bones that were broken. I knew I was hurt. I didn't know that I was paralyzed. Like I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know exactly what it was. And so he pulled back the covers and he said, "We're just going to move your feet today." And so I went to move my feet and they wouldn't move. And I was like, oh no. And so it's like I tried again, and I don't know how to explain that feeling of everything you have, like focusing, like trying to move this thing, and it just sat there, And I think the therapist could kind of see what was going on inside my head. And so he just kind of reached his hand over there and he said, sometimes these hospital socks tend to get stuck on the sheets, and so I'll just kind of help slide you over. And he slid me off the bed and helped me into a wheelchair. And then he wheeled me down to the therapy room, and he's like, "I just want you to pull yourself up." I was between these two metal bars, and he just wanted me to pull myself up out of the wheelchair. And I tried and tried and tried, and I just couldn't do it because, my right leg femur was broken and my left leg was paralyzed, and it kept buckling and I couldn't stand. And so he just kind of wheeled himself over there and braced his knee against mine, and I was able to pull myself up. And then on the way back to my room, I said, "Do you think I'll be able to be walking in a month or so?" And he was like, "Huh." And it didn't say much, and I was like, "Well, maybe with just a walker or something." And he was like, "I'll have you in a walker." And he put me in my room, and then he left, and he went to my mom, and he said, "I don't think she'll ever walk again." Just because of the way that therapy had gone. But he didn't tell me, which I'm glad of, because in my mind it was just a matter of time. And so...
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Yeah.
So one interesting thing in this whole process is at every single step, like when they first got her into the hospital, they said, "We're waiting for her vitals to stabilize enough that she could endure surgery." And they kept waiting and waiting, and she couldn't stabilize. And so finally they said, "Well, she's not going to stabilize until we do the surgery. Like we've got to do something to relieve some of the pain." Because they were trying to balance, if they gave her too much pain medication, her heart would start having trouble. But if they didn't give her enough, her heart would have trouble because of all the pain she was in. So they were trying to balance that, and finally they said she's not going to stabilize until we can do something to minimize her pain. So they said, we're going to go ahead and do the surgery on her leg. And then they said, we'll probably have to wait 2 or 3 days before we can do the surgery on her ribs and allow her to heal enough that she can handle another surgery. So they did the surgery, and about 3 hours after the surgery, they were like, she's doing so well, we're going to go ahead and do her ribs now instead of waiting a few days. And so they did her ribs, and then it was like, wow, she's doing so well. We're going to, everything just kept progressing so much faster than they thought. And even like when she would go to her physical therapy, they would say, our goal is this today. And then she would do so much better than what they thought. It was like, oh, well then, they'd set a new goal. And every single day, no matter what it was, she was like surpassing whatever the goal was for that day. So that was something that was really, really interesting to watch.
Well, for me, like I said, I didn't know how bad it was, and so in my mind, it was just what I have to do to get home, And so he'd say, "Okay, we're going to walk 100 feet today," and I'd be like, "Okay," and I walk 100 feet, and it wasn't in my mind that I can't do it, It was just that's what I'm going to do because I wasn't, and I think not being aware was a big thing in helping me heal a lot.
I remember when she woke up the first time. And I was in the room with her. There was a few of us that were there. And she woke up, and she couldn't talk because she was
and you guys
intubated.
had thought that I would be brain damaged.
Yeah, they said, we don't know how much brain damage there's going to be, but she does have brain damage. And so we were all, anxious about how bad the brain damage was. And so she woke up, and her first reaction was to try to pull everything out of her throat, And so that's when they started trying to tie her down a little bit, and then she was trying to talk around the tubes to ask what had happened. And we could kind of tell from the way she was moving her mouth and stuff. She wanted to know what had happened. And so we told her, and she loved that swing. She had loved it for years. And so as soon as we told her, she's like, you could tell she was upset that that's what had caused the problem, because she was afraid they would take the swing down or something, but which I thought was funny that was her concern, but it was obvious she was concerned about that. And then the next thing she did is she looked over at her left hand that was paralyzed, and then she looked up at me, probably because I play the piano too. We both play the piano, and she was worried about the fact that she couldn't move her hand and how that was going to affect her playing the piano. And I think she knew that of all the people in the room, I would understand what she was trying to say, because she looked down at her hand, and then she looked over at her other hand and wiggled her fingers. And I knew she was asking, am I going to be able to play the piano again? And so I just told her, we don't know, that your abilities might come back, they might not, we don't know what's going to happen. And then her next thought was that she wanted my brother there. He wasn't in the room, and she wanted him there. And so she kept trying to say his name. And so we were talking amongst ourselves, saying, well, who's got his phone number? Somebody needs to call him. And nobody there had his phone number. And so she was getting frustrated, and she took her hand that she could move, and she hit me to get my attention. And then she took my hand and spelled out his phone number in my hand. And she had it memorized, and she sat there, and she kept trying to show me. One of the numbers was 6, and so she'd do 5 and then 1. And I would say, 5, 1, no, 5, 1, But it was really exciting to see, if she is aware enough to remember his phone number, she's probably going to be still in there. The brain damage isn't such that we've lost who she is. So that was kind of an exciting moment. And then it was just watching all the little improvements from then on. Watching her learn how to walk and eat and